All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're breaking down a really unique and honestly pretty intriguing approach to teaching languages, the silent way. It completely flips the traditional classroom on its head, and we're going to see exactly how it works.
So here's our roadmap. We'll start with a basic definition, then get into the core principles behind it. We'll look at the specific tools used in the classroom, see some techniques in action, and then, of course, weigh the pros and cons, the claimed advantages versus the criticisms.
So, first question. What in the world is the silent way? Well, at its heart is this really radical idea from its creator, Caleb Godignow. The teacher is supposed to be silent, like as much as possible. This creates a kind of space, a vacuum, that encourages or maybe even forces the students to step up and start producing the language themselves. The whole focus shifts away from the teacher's performance and puts it squarely on the student's learning and production.
And that leads to a classroom that looks and feels totally different. I mean, the teacher's silence is the most obvious thing, right? But it's part of a bigger picture. Learning here is treated like problem solving. It's about discovery. You use physical things like colored rods and charts to make language tangible. And a huge goal is to make students independent thinkers. They're even encouraged to correct each other. But here's the twist. Even though the method feels so revolutionary, the syllabus itself is often very traditional and grammar-based.
Okay, so what's the philosophy here? Why all the silence? Let's get into the core principles that drive this whole method.
This one quote from Godignow really says it all. Teaching is subordinated to learning. What that means is, it doesn't matter how brilliantly a teacher explains something. The only thing that matters is what the student actually learns and discovers for themselves. The teacher is just there to provoke that learning.
And that philosophy is built on these 4 pillars. First, discovery learning. You figure out the rules on your own instead of having them spoon-fed to you. This leads to learner autonomy, where you start to develop your own internal sense of what's right and wrong in the language. You engage with it like a creative puzzle to be solved. And finally, you use physical objects to bridge the gap between abstract ideas and the actual language.
So let's talk about those physical objects. What are the actual tools a teacher uses to make a silent classroom work?
The toolkit is very specific and really clever. The most famous items are the Cuisenaire rods. You know, those little colored wooden blocks of different lengths? They can be used to represent anything. Words, sentences, ideas, you name it. Then you have the charts. The sound color charts are amazing. They link every sound in the language to a specific color, so the teacher can teach pronunciation just by pointing. You also have word charts for key vocabulary. And the teacher's primary instrument? A simple pointer. That's how they conduct the entire lesson without saying a word.
This image here kind of pulls it all together. You can see the theory on the left. Learning is problem solving. In the middle, you've got the roles. The teacher is the silent guide, and the learner is the active problem solver. And that leads the activities on the right, like pronunciation work and group collaboration, all driven by the students themselves. It really shows you how it's all one connected system.
Okay, so we've got the what and the why. Now let's look at the how. How does a teacher actually apply this stuff in a real lesson?
The techniques are all designed to get the students talking. Teacher silence is obviously number 1. Elicitation is huge. The teacher uses gestures, facial expressions, maybe a tap of the pointer to pull the language out of the students instead of putting it in. Another key part is peer correction. Students are expected to help each other out. And when the teacher does give feedback, it's super minimal, often just a simple gesture to let a student know they should try again.
So here's a classic example of an activity. A teacher might use the Cuisenaire rods to lay out a simple floor plan of a house on a table. Then they might pick up a tiny rod, gesture that it's a table, and then look at the students with a questioning expression. The students then have to work together to produce a sentence like, "Put the table in the middle of the dining room." The teacher doesn't say a word, but this simple setup can lead to some really complex language production.
So with an approach this different, you have to wonder, what are the supposed benefits? Why would anyone choose to learn or teach this way?
Well, proponents say the benefits are huge. It's not just about learning words. It's about developing real-life skills like independence and taking responsibility for your own learning. Since you can't just passively listen, you're forced to be super alert and focused. The idea is that when you discover something for yourself, you remember it way better. It also naturally encourages students to cooperate. And thanks to those sound color charts, it often builds a really solid foundation in pronunciation right from the start.
But of course, no method is perfect. It's not for everyone. So let's wrap up by taking a critical look at the silent way and its legacy. One of the most interesting criticisms is this sort of contradiction between the philosophy and the practice. The philosophy is so radical, it's all about awareness and discovery, But when you look at what actually happens in the classroom, it often follows a pretty traditional step-by-step grammar syllabus. It's like using revolutionary tools to build a very conventional house.
And there are other, more direct critiques. For a lot of students, especially beginners, all that silence can just be plain stressful. It can create a lot of anxiety. And for the teacher, it's incredibly difficult. You need tons of specialized training to pull this off well. The principles can feel very abstract and hard to apply. And maybe the biggest issue for some is that there isn't a lot of scientific research to actually prove that it's more effective than other methods. A lot of the evidence is anecdotal.
But despite all the challenges, the silent way leaves us with a really powerful question. We live in an age of nonstop noise and information, where we often think a good teacher is one who talks a lot. But what if we're wrong? In an age of constant communication, could silence actually be a teacher's most powerful and most underutilized tool? It's definitely something to think about.